Welcome to a new series of Ask Brynn. It's been a long time. We're back on the scene now. We're working with a great company called Microwake. There we go, guys. Microwake. They're a fantastic group out of Kelowna, BC that's doing some wonderful work. I'm going to use some of their products and some of their background knowledge to explain some of the functionality of mushrooms, especially ones that are non-psychedelic. First, I'm going to focus on psychedelics, but we'll get into that in a bit. The series will focus on mushrooms of all types. First, we will focus on magic mushrooms and their psychedelic properties. Then we will explore something called functional mushrooms, or non-psychedelic mushrooms, that a lot of people may consider to be nutritional. To begin, let's talk about the fun guy at the party. I'm going to start talking about mushrooms. Of course, I'm going to start talking about the fun guys, the magic mushrooms, the psilocybin mushrooms that we're all used to and familiar with. We're going to start there because that's a familiarity. Most people are going to understand that, the mushrooms in the grocery store are healthy for you, that kind of thing. But you also understand that a magic mushroom has, some interesting qualities to it. It can bring psychedelic experiences. It's even being used as a helpful tool for psychedelic or psychiatric treatments such as PTSD and other issues. People seek out the psychedelic quality of magic mushrooms for various different reasons. It can be personal exploration, recreational, that type of thing. It can be for spiritual purposes. People find a connection to it. It seems to open things up in them, which kind of chemically explains a few things as you go through the experiences. You start to learn how you get high from mushrooms. And the other one is it can also be a great medicinal tool when treating psychiatric experiences, things like PTSD and other issues. The way the mushrooms work with the brain is different than what you would consider to be a traditional style drug. And mushrooms is actually a food, and you're having sort of a food reactionary. There's compounds in there that the body is going to absorb that is very familiar and similar to the compounds inside of our own body that many millennia ago, hundreds of millions of years ago, we were of the same family, and animals and sort of mycelia-like mushrooms moved on to different angles. So we're very closely related. So a lot of the compounds, as we've seen with cannabis and plant compounds, because at one point we were closely related, can interact with each other. Now, what I want to focus on here is how does a magic mushroom get you high? How does this actually work? Now, there are tons of different types of magic mushrooms, but they all have similar compounds in them that give the effect of a trip, or even if you don't necessarily get that trip high out of it, having some kind of effect on the brain or psychiatric change to the brain. This is experienced throughout studies in science that are looking into various types of mushrooms, particularly psychedelic mushrooms, under guidances of, say, the authority like MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies. Many universities, including here in Kelowna at UBCO, Dr. Zach Walsh has been working with various psychiatric experience chemicals, mushrooms and LSDs and MDMA type things like that. And understanding their effect on the brain, their effect on the body, and their effect on the recovery of the brain afterwards. So there's a millennia, 10,000 years or more, recorded drawings, recordings of various different kinds throughout the ages of our interactions with mushrooms as a food substance, as a spiritual substance. So we know for a fact that this is something that is, if done properly, can be healthy for us. Our bodies are kind of designed to interact with it. But how does that work? What are we taking when we take those wicked little mushrooms? Sometimes they're the big babies, sometimes the little tiny ones, and you'd expect to think that, a certain amount of mushrooms on each kind is going to get you the same high. Very much with cannabis and other products, various types, strains, variances in those mushrooms can make a big difference. There are compounds in mushrooms, very much like in cannabis. We discovered that there are hundreds of compounds in cannabis that have interactions with the body, positive, negative. Certain amounts of those compounds, percentages of those compounds, maybe missing compound, can have a lot of varying effects on how that high will affect you, or maybe its medicinal qualities of that high. Now, we have the same thing going on in mushrooms. We have that entourage effect as well. Most people are going to be super familiar with the idea of psilocybin. Psilocybin is the active compound in magic mushrooms that gets you that buzz. But we thought the same thing with THC. We thought that THC was the only thing in there that would give you a high. Now, when the scientists Raphael Mechoulam and Lemire Hanous smuggled the first, they smuggled a pound, I've talked to these guys, smuggled a pound of hashish from Egypt into the University of Tel Aviv to study why and how, what in cannabis got you high. And they went along the same idea that the uh, compound is going to be a singular compound. Like with alcohol, it's alcohol. But we've refined it down to that point. We've taken a lot of the other things out of there. That's why you have a lot of traditional tinctures or alcohol substances that maybe had a lot of a byproduct left in them from the processing, maybe some products from the plant left in the processing. Things that probably tasted something like Jägermeister. Elixirs, that types of things. Now, with modern day alcohol, we've refined it down to you just have one single molecule. You've added that to your blend of whatever, and then you have your alcoholic drink. So yeah, same with nicotine. Nicotine, very focused down. I'm sure there are other compounds in it, but it's very focused down to one compound, nicotine compound, and that's going to get you your fix. With mushrooms, the same mistake was made that with cannabis or other compounds especially, that it's just psilocybin that gets you that high. Now, the neat part about psilocybin is something called a tryptamine compound. All of the active entourage effects, or trip compounds, which I'm going to call them, in the mushrooms all have certain percentages. We have 4 different compounds that I'm going to look at. Now, tryptamine compounds interact, now I may be off here in a little bit, I'm still navigating this and learning, but they interact with serotonin receptors, dopamine receptors, and other parts of the brain. I believe the original idea with this is part of as mycelium communicates with itself through its network, our nervous system is very similar to what you would consider to be like a mycelium network. Now, mycelium is in the most crude form, the roots that you don't see, and the mushroom is the fruiting body that comes out of that. So oftentimes you won't see those myceliums. They'll exist for a very long time. For example, I live in a very dry area. Middle of summer, we had a big rainfall. It was kind of damp and wet for a few days, which was odd. And then around all the trees where all the water was dripping down in my yard, there was all these mushrooms growing in the circular formation around the trees. And that mycelium had been living there and existing there for quite some time and communicating. And it uses these different chemicals to communicate throughout its mycelium network. If you can imagine, kind of like I said, your brain being here as a giant network that spreads out throughout the ground and is able to communicate, hear, and understand. Mushrooms are very intelligent. It would be foolish to think that a living creature like that doesn't have some kind of functional understanding. Maybe it can't speak, but it can speak to itself. It can speak to other plants. It can understand what's going on around it and adapt. And a mycelium exists in all kinds of things. You could see moldy cheese, that's a type of mycelium. You could see the mushrooms growing in your yard or the ones that are in the grocery store. But they all essentially created in the same way. Cordyceps are a little different. I'll explain those in another video, but again, they're essentially just a mycelium that's growing the fruiting body. And when we're thinking about, we think mushrooms, we think that fruiting body. Now that fruiting body, just like a marijuana plant, or if you would even think of sort of buds in the marijuana plant, they're going to have these group of compounds. These tryptamine compounds. The psilocybin was identified, I don't have the information on this, I meant to write it down as to when it was sort of identified, but the understanding is that psilocybin is the compound within that you eat or you ingest or you take into your body, and that starts that process. But there are 4 compounds. There's psilocybin, psilocin, baeocystin, and norbaeocystin. All 4 of these compounds are what I'm going to focus on as being the trip compounds. And they have what we have the entourage effect. Somewhere between 12 to 14% of a good mushroom is going to consist of these trip compounds. Depending on the amount of compounds, the percentage of compounds or missing amount of compounds of these 4 compounds can very much change how your trip is. You might have a really cool, active, calming trip, and you might have something like, I've got a lot of friends who've gone to different places in the world, tried the little tiny mushrooms, don't know what strain they are, said that they took, they're like, oh, this will be, they were warned, no, don't take a handful, these little ones will do it. Apparently there's enough of the compounds in the right percentages to really give you a kick in the ass, and something that most people aren't expecting. It can be very, very intense. Sorry guys, just got some notes here. I want to make sure I keep on those. What's happening when we ingest mushrooms? First thing, when we ingest mushrooms, it's food. Our body has identified it as food. We've been eating it for as long as we've been eating anything at all. We've been eating various types of mushrooms. So even with modern foods, processed foods, there's a lot of things that you can eat that your body doesn't recognize as a food. Olestra is an excellent example. This is an oil that was created that couldn't be absorbed by the body. They were putting it in potato chips and all kinds of other things. And the problem is that because it couldn't be absorbed by the body, it also left the body as an oil. So the side effect was anal leakage. But it was not recognized as a food, so therefore there weren't enzymes, and the process of breaking food down didn't happen. But with mushrooms, it's food. Whether we should be eating it or not, whether these are the kinds of mushrooms that are the kinds that heal, the kinds that thrill, or the kinds that kill, there's a varying range in there. But when we eat mushrooms, our body automatically recognizes them as food. It starts that process of breaking down, digesting, or what they call metabolizing the mushroom very, very quickly. That also too, mushrooms break down in the body a little differently than other foods. They turn into in my personal experience eating magic mushrooms, I can't say for all mushrooms, but in my personal experience of eating mushrooms, if you throw them up, they seem to have the mushrooms that come up will have a green slime on them, or the person will throw up green sort of a slimy material. The cellulose material, the hard woody-like material that the mushroom is made from, especially dried magic mushrooms, is very difficult to digest. But when it does digest, or when it's pulling out those nutrients out of there, it leaves this gel-like substance inside, kind of like the TMAT turtle goo from back in the 80s. Or ectoplasm, it kind of has that effect, that look to it. Now, if you throw up after eating mushrooms and you release whatever's inside your stomach that may be helping to digest that, you're just going to be left with this layer on the inside of your guts. And a few friends that I've had experiences with have told me that you get really high because your body is then left with that as the only food left in the body to digest, and it gives it a really good focus instead of trying to eat the pizza or whatever else you had earlier in the day. You've expelled that. So I find it interesting that the body will continue to digest, of course, what's left inside, but because it's the only thing left inside, that it can become very intense, that the body becomes very, it tries to get as much as it can out of that food substance before it passes it on, because it's missing the rest. That seems to affect the high. I've had a lot of friends eat magic mushrooms, throw up at some point, and my answer has always been, bye, your trip's about to get really, really heavy. And also we'll study into that a little more, but again, it shows the variances of how the body digests, metabolizes, and uses these different compounds. Psilocybin, as I said, psilocybin is the very first compound that was identified. It's kind of the THC of magic mushrooms. It's actually psilocybin cubensis that are the types of mushrooms that do give you that psilocybin high. Psilocybin is a tryptamine compound. Essentially, it's a compound that can interact with the body. We obviously feel it, can get high from it, various different effects. Now, you can take a little bit of mushrooms, a micro or macro amount of mushrooms, and not necessarily feel that high. You maybe get a clarity out of it. You might feel a bit of a difference. But the idea behind macro and micro dosaging, just like with cannabis, is that you aren't necessarily supposed to feel the high. You're supposed to be able to go to work, still function, drive your car, do those different types of things without an intoxicating feeling, yet having the benefits of how a psychedelic of this type moves through the brain and the nervous system and the recovery that happens afterwards. There are people who enjoy the recreational high. They might take a gram or two of magic mushrooms and they might have a great time. Some people akin it to sort of being having an alcoholic buzz with a lot of energy, a little less of the intoxication, but have a great time. And then there are people who take what are called the heroic doses. This can be 4, 6, 8 grams of mushrooms, and they're going to trip. They're going to trip really hard. There's a lot of mushrooms in there. The body's digesting a lot, and it takes a bit longer for the compounds to move through the body because you're still digesting and absorbing a lot of them. And they can metabolize from psilocybin into different compounds, or the smaller compounds that I talk about may become more prevalent as they're digested longer. Now, what happens to psilocybin when you eat it? When you eat something and you take it into your body, the body then metabolizes it and breaks down. It'll pull away different types of nutrients and other compounds that it's trying to eat and need. It's going to try to pull out as much nutrients as it can. And with the psilocybin enters the hepatic system, the heptic system, where that goes through your liver and it starts to go through your body. And it breaks psilocybin down into psilocin. So now you have psilocin. Psilocin is an interesting compound because, yes, psilocybin does give you a psychedelic trip. It can make you high. It is an active compound. We can see changes in the brain when you eat it. But when it breaks down into psilocin, psilocin is the one that gives you the trip. Psilocin is the visual, the audio drug. And as it breaks down from psilocybin into psilocin inside your body, the very much the same way that THC breaks down into another compound when you eat it. And so you can get a person who can smoke a lot of weed, but when they eat it, they can't handle it, or vice versa. It's because there's two different compounds that are happening here. The THC is no longer THC, it's something else. The psilocybin is now being turned into psilocin, and you're actually absorbing the psilocin into your system. Now, because it's a natural breakdown of THC, just like of psilocybin, just like CBN is a natural breakdown of THC. It takes you from getting high to making you sleepy because it's a different compound now. It has aged or metabolized. The psilocybin becomes psilocin. Now, also, you may have psilocin already present in the strain of mushroom that you're at, because in its lifetime, it may break down into a little bit of that. So every mushroom is going to have, or most mushrooms, magic mushrooms, are going to have a little bit of psilocin present, and some will have a little more. Now, what's the difference between psilocybin and psilocin? I'm not going to get into it chemically speaking because it's way over both of our heads, or all of our heads at this point. But psilocin is what gives you that really intense mushroom feeling. Psilocybin is that beginning voom, voom, voom. When you start to feel the high, the body is digesting it, it's starting to break it down. Now, if you have a high content of psilocin in that mushroom to begin with, your mushroom high is going to be really quick and really intense. However, it may not last as long. Psilocybin turns into psilocin. Psilocin is the one that really trips you out. Psilocybin has a lot of effects as well, but when you start to really trip, sometimes it's when people start to bad trip or have a really good trip. But when you're at that point, when you're no longer here, but you're over here, that's psilocin and a compound of how psilocybin and psilocin affect you. So people who were recreational users became used to different types of strains and started to ask for different types of strains, such as penis envy, daddy long legs, golden teachers, various mushrooms that were created in different parts of the world, or sort of found or cultivated in different parts of the world originally, and have different amounts of those compounds in it. So we have psilocybin and we have psilocin. Psilocin comes from psilocybin. It is a breakdown compound, a breakdown tryptamine compound from psilocybin, and those are your two compounds. So if you're looking at sort of, again, with cannabis, we talked about THC and the CBD. If you mix them together in certain amounts, enough CBD can interact with THC high. You can interact with that. You can make different compounds. They have different effects. This is how it falls into the same category. Now, something that I learned in my time running Magic Mushrooms farms or Magic Mountain farms and interacting with people who were studying or using magic mushrooms for spiritual purposes, I learned a lot from what I would call sort of the mushroom or psychedelic gurus. This is how I got the nickname, the psychedelic philosopher, because I would take what I was learned and I would teach it, and I would learn and listen from others, and we had cool little sessions. Sometimes we were high, cool little sessions where we would discuss this and learn and teach. And it was very holistic and very organic. It was a very neat experience, very hippie experience. But I took away from that the knowledge that I'm sharing with you. Now, some of these things I learned from very, very intelligent people. They're doing some very, very interesting studies, scientists, laboratory people, pharmaceutical people who were looking into these compounds, and even some of the cannabis people looking into stretching into it. So for a while, we had a facility in interior BC here where we were growing magic mushrooms. We were creating different strains. We were creating the mycelial compounds in these little swirly jars, being able to learn how to create it, spread it, how to work with the genetics. And during that, we would be sending these out to various universities for study. And one of the cool things that we came back is that said to us is that you're not looking at just two compounds. They were surprised that we understood psilocin and how the psilocin broke down, or psilocybin broke down into psilocin. But what we found is there's also two other compounds, at least they've identified two other compounds so far, that very definitely have an effect on the brain, that are very definitely part of mushrooms. And their presence or their lack of presence, the percentage of them they may be, can have a drastically changing effect on psilocybin and psilocin. And they have their own effects on the body. Again, if we go back and we look at all the things that we learned about cannabis, this all kind of falls into place. This is how nature kind of works. The next compound, now this compound here, if there's a significant amount of this compound here, it's going to be another one of those wicked trips. That's what we're finding in those little tiny mushrooms. It's something called baeocystin or baeocystine. Chemically similar to psilocybin and psilocin, as an entourage effect, it can swing the highs in intensity and length of the highs. It can affect how much of psilocin or psilocybin is taken into the body. It can really change the different types of high. Just like when you find a great, different types of weed, okay, or whatever, different types of similar drugs and compounds can have a very differing effect depending on sort of the micro switches inside. Now, baeocystin is very new to the understanding. A lot of people in the mushroom world don't even know it exists. I don't know enough to say, hey, this is when it's created, or this is when it's happening. I will learn that and share that as time comes. But baeocystin affects psilocybin and psilocin and how they interact with the dopamine and serotonin receptors in the brain, as well as a couple of others. Another fourth compound. So now we have psilocybin, psilocin, baeocystin, or baeocystine, and norbaeocystine. Norbaeocystine is a chemical breakdown of baeocystine. Again, the presence of this inside the mushroom will have a changing effect on the length of the high, the type of the high, which parts of the brain and nervous system are interacted. It comes from baeocystin, the same way that psilocin comes from psilocybin. It is a breakdown compound. It may be present if there is baeocystin in the mushroom. It may be some of this norbaeocystine in there as well. So now you have these four trip compounds. The trip compounds, the entourage effect of these trip compounds. As I said before, between 12 and 14% of a magic mushroom is going to be these compounds. Depending on their percentages, will determine where the high is, how intense it is. Is it visual? Is it audio? Is it affecting your nervous system? Which is really when you're tripping out and you're hearing and seeing things, or is it affecting your brain? And that's when you're getting like those giggle trips and things like that. Or maybe you're having an awakening experience. Because what happens with psychedelics is your brain begins to absorb much, much, much more of the sensories that are going on, what you see, what you hear, what you feel. I had a friend of mine tell me one time, he's like, are you high? And I was like, I'm not sure. He's like, look at your hand. And I pulled my hand out and I'm looking at my hand and he's like, you're high. I was like, how can you tell? He's like, because your hand's trippy, isn't it? Yeah. But even then, it wasn't a huge visual trip. It was just, I was absorbing more of what was going on, more of the creases and crevices and hairs and the way that my hand moved. I was bringing more of that in, and the brain was trying to understand and see more. And inside your brain, all this going on, it just opens right up and it tries to understand. Now you have these other dopamine, serotonin, and other compounds in the body kind of flowing around. It feels good, and the brain can get really confused. And this is what's going on. Now, that is kind of how we use it for psychiatric medicine. We allow the brain to reach a point where it needs to heal from the experience. But what it does is it actually starts to rewrite some of the chemical pathways of our memories and of our trauma responses. I'll go back to that in a little bit. I'll talk a little bit more about our four trip compounds. Does everybody remember what that is? Psilocybin, psilocin, baeocystin, and norbaeocystin. Psilocybin has a psychedelic effect on the brain, often attributed to the first waves of a high or adrenaline. I often feel a few waves before I get high, often confused as the only trip compound. It's very important in the entourage effect of your high. Psilocybin percentage is always guaranteed for a great high and a solid trip. So if there's lots of psilocybin, then you're going to get lots of psilocin, and then you're going to get nice and high. Psilocin. Now, psilocin is psilocybin is psilocin. Now, your psilocybin. My notes are confusing. Psilocybin will break down into psilocin. As the psilocin kicks in, your trip, you really start to roll through your trip. It's the sort of the next stage. It's the one where most people probably attribute a mushroom high to, is that feeling, but you're also getting a bit of an entourage effect. Now you've eaten them for a little while, they're digesting in your body, you're getting a great buzz, but as you notice during your trip, it can change throughout the trip a little bit. It can be more intense, more funny, more paranoid, more whatever it is that's sort of going on and what's going on inside your own mind. That's why it's always good to have a nice place to take your trip, or even a trip sitter, a babysitter that'll watch you, somebody that you can trust, because you can very easily toil into a bad situation if you really wanted to, if you weren't careful. People with psychiatric issues should be careful, as with taking anything else, that it may exasperate things. Talk to somebody or find somebody who knows something about this. Reach out, maybe we can connect you with somebody that can help with you in your trip sort of adventure, or anything beyond microdosage. Baeocystin, a tryptamine compound that has varying effects on psilocybin and psilocin interactions with the brain and nervous systems. A trip can range from very mellow to very intense. Some may hear or see things, having audio and visual hallucinations. This is when your brain and systems are most affected by the drugs, or the compounds. I hate to use the word drug with mushrooms, but the compounds that are floating inside your brain and how you're navigating it. And even your own personal opinions, views, spirituality may have an effect on how you navigate that. Another tryptamine compound derived from baeocystin is norbaeocystin. It's suspected to have a strong influence on baeocystin and its effects on the entourage. So, as I learn more, I'll explain how these different drugs and where they're interacting. But you need to understand, not only is it affecting your brain, but this compounds, because they're very similar in communication. I believe that they're a communication tool used by the mycelium and the mushrooms to communicate with itself and with each other. And we know it has to be able to tell what's going on in the real world. How is it being affected? Is this a healthy place? Is this not a healthy place? Trees can talk to each other. Grass can talk to each other. We know these things now. The smell of grass that's been cut is the screams of grass. It's releasing hormones and chemicals into the air to warn other plants to be prepared for grazing, basically, so that they can survive such a thing. We know that mycelium can communicate and does communicate with trees, grasses, and other things within these soils. It might not be reactive like we are and have that what we consider to be intelligence, but there's definitely an intelligent process going on here. When these compounds are interacting not only with our brain, but they're also interacting with our nervous system, which is going to be literally our version of the mycelium network. So it interacts with it very, very closely. And how your brain and how your sort of settings are will affect that, and has a major change in how your trip is and how different types of things are handled. Each of us interacts with our little magic buddies differently. On that subject, how do we interact with mushrooms and the trip compounds? It is generally understood the four compounds interact with our serotonin and dopamine receptors, sending an overload of information to the nervous system and often confusing the brain. And again, remember, you're absorbing so much more. When you take a psychedelic, your brain is trying to absorb everything that's coming in. Normally we filter it. We try to take in as much as we can, unless we can have the feeling of being overwhelmed. But all of a sudden your brain is like trying to take everything in, and it's having a little bit of a tough time navigating that. Or at least making your conscious part of your brain kind of keep up. The effect is commonly used. So as mushrooms take an effect on the brain, when you stop taking the mushrooms, so there's different things. With psychedelics, I'm talking about psychedelics right now. With psychedelic mushrooms, when you take it and then you stop taking it, your brain goes through sort of a repair cycle. I'm not saying that it necessarily hurts your brain. I'm sure enough of it could probably give you a fry, but the brain is all of a sudden, because it's been interacting with these compounds, these ancient compounds that it's wired to deal with, but it hasn't done so in a very long time. So, for example, for psychiatric experiences, people will often go through these heroic dose sessions. For example, I'll give a personal experience. When I was younger, I moved to Kelowna. I had kind of a confusing past life. A lot of things that I was dealing with. I was delving very heavily into alcohol to try to forget my stresses and my traumas, which I knew wasn't a healthy path, but that was the path I was going down anyway. I was screaming for someone to arrest me or help me, get me off the street of what I was doing, whatever it was. It was terrible. I went down to a little town to visit a friend of mine, and these guys started doing lots of mushrooms, and you know, became great friends of mine as we grew up, and we learned a lot together. But I took this, you know, I don't even know how much, just great mushroom trip, and it was wonderful. It was a fantastic experience. I laughed for 2 hours straight, maybe longer. My guts hurt, but when I got out of that this next day, I'm sitting at this behind this store waiting for a bus to come, a Greyhound style bus to come to take me back home. Which I don't remember the drive at all. I don't remember the drive at all. I just remember being in the back of this store. And I felt really mushy. My head was mushy, but the flowers were beautiful. The robin buzz was beautiful. It was very peaceful, very calming. And what was happening there is I actually kind of scrambled a little bit the pathways, my instant pathways, or your Windows hotkeys, if you will, of your brain. And a lot of those went towards a trauma pathway. And it triggered me to be not okay. It triggered me to continue to suffer, to think about these things first, even if I wasn't consciously doing it. It's that trauma pathway. But with the mushrooms, after a couple of days of kind of having to kind of re-navigate all this mush in my head, which kind of feels like a mushroom mushy feeling, I noticed that I was happier. And this is where I started to see, I talked to other people and learn a little bit more. And what happens is those pathways have created a new path of easiest access. So instead of going back to those difficult roads and traumas, it made new pathways. And as it made new pathways, pardon me, as it made new pathways, I was no longer burdened by as much of the stresses and traumas that I had. Now, for me, one, two, maybe three of this style trips over a 2-year period was very helpful and healthy. And I haven't really delved into doing them very much afterwards, maybe half a dozen times afterwards. Not because I don't like it, but I just, I keep it for, now I use it as a specific purpose. I have a certain respect for it beyond it just being a tool or a toy. And then I've learned a whole bunch. We'll talk about adding lemon juice to your mushrooms. If you're doing mushrooms, add a little lemon juice. For some reason, it increases the high. Last time I did it, I had about 1.5 grams, made it a tea with some lemon juice, and we planned 420 right there in the Amsterdam Cafe in Vancouver. Very cool experience. At some point, I was a little higher than I needed to be, but I didn't take that much. And at the same time, it was very creative, and we planned 420 at Sunset Beach for 2023. It was a very, very cool experience. The reasons that we seek these psychiatric effects or psychedelic effects, why are we out there seeking that effect? Entertainment and recreational purposes. Of course, to get high. Why not? It's a great high. It's a little bit of mushroom fuzzy brain going on if you take a little much for a day or two, but it's not going to affect you. You're going to be able to go to work, you're going to be able to do your things. You're not going to have a hangover. It's not going to hurt your liver. It's not going to do these other things unless you're taking mass amounts of what's essentially food poisoning every day. But you're okay. If you follow the guidelines, if you're gentle to yourself, take a couple of grams or less at a time, you should do just fine. Mental health, PTSD treatment. It is known that using magic mushrooms can help the brain rewrite the neural pathways and help defer symptoms of PTSD, anxiety, and other ailments. This is not me making it up. This is not me saying, hey, this is what I've learned from some hippies in the forest, which it is. Scientific studies, medical studies, people like Dr. Zach Walsh who are studying the effects of psychedelics on the brain and their potential psychiatric uses. Can we pull people away from traditional medications that maybe help, but as it's a lifetime answer, is taking pills every day? Can we help learn and correct and heal the brain And that's where the focus of psychedelic studies is. The plan is not to put a person on a psychiatric or a psychiatric forever. That would just put them in a different place. That would be counterproductive to what we're trying to achieve. The goal is to use it to help the brain connect, reconnect, and maybe heal. And if you can do that, if you can remove stresses, if you can remove traumas, not remove, rewrite the pathways, you can become a happier, more peaceful person. And it's really important, especially when other traditional methods aren't working, or especially for people that have to take daily pills. I'm not saying that it's going to replace pharmaceuticals. It's like with cannabis, it doesn't replace all pharmaceuticals. It can replace a lot of them, but it's also going to change and affect how your body reacts, how your brain and nervous system react, and maybe even allow you to titrate off of some of those, or to change, or even become into a different type of drug, which is a little less serious. Micro and macro dosaging. This is taking a, less than a gram of mushrooms, and it varies between 750, 75% of a gram, 50% of a gram, all the way to say 10 to 5% of a gram. Micro and macro dosaging. The idea with micro and macro dosaging is that you're not going to get high. You're not going to overwhelm the brain with all that information that it needs to take in. Not everybody needs that, especially people who are dealing with daily anxieties, things like that. Microdosaging and macrodosaging programs, it's 3 to 5 days of taking the drug, then 3 to 5 days off of the drug, sorry, mushroom and compound, then being back on. So it's going to be under the influence, not under the influence, under the influence, not under the influence. And the brain is slowly going to create those neural pathway connections and rewrite them. Instead of it doing it overnight like it did to my head, then it'll do it more casually, more gradually. The body likes that better. We might still want to get high. There's still the opportunity for that. But in an everyday experience, the little bit of that psychedelic compound can be quite helpful. And a lot of psychiatric medications work this way. If you maybe don't take your pill, or if you take too many of your pills, you can really whack you out. You're probably dealing with maybe not psychedelic compounds, but dealing with the very same receptors and checks and balances that it's trying to keep in check. Now, the next part is blended compounds. Now, the next thing I'm going to step into, and I'm going to start talking about microwake. And see that right there? That's not a psychedelic compound. It's a mushroom and herbal blend. Sorry, the camera's not very good. We've got here glucosamine, excellent for joints and bones. You're going to start taking glucosamine and chondroitin when you have arthritis. When your pets have arthritis, it helps create the lubrication inside your joints. Turmeric. If you've ever done any studies on turmeric, like for example, I was at the fair, the big agricultural fair we have here in interior BC, and there was a gentleman there who was just selling turmeric. We did all kinds of different blends with it and capsules of it. Turmeric is an incredible drug for the body, compound for the body, for digestion, for health. Excellent tool. Collagen powder. And collagen powder has various different effects on the body, especially the insides. When you think about keeping your wonderful skin and healthy and good, you've got to keep your insides healthy and good as well. Lion's mane, which we'll get into later. Lion's mane has some great medicinal compounds and medicinal purposes. And then black pepper. Black pepper acts as a preservative, which is, if you've ever seen a lot of natural preservatives, as well as black pepper can have some interesting calming effects on the body as well. So for example, if you're really tripping out on weed, and if you can handle it, eat some black peppercorns. The beta-caryophyllene, which is the compound which is found in cannabis as well, can help bring that intense high down. And I assume that it'll be beta-caryophyllene, that's probably the active component in the black pepper in there. So this particular blend of mushrooms, herbs, and their various compounds will be able to help with joint and muscle pain relief. Probably mostly because of the collagen powder, the lion's mane, but the others will definitely have an effect as well. Can you mix psychedelic mushrooms with these compounds? Absolutely. A part of my studies, and I'm going to be totally clear, I'm going to be working with Microwake coming in the next couple of weeks, learning their processes, learning how they do everything from the ground up. I've spent some time with their salespeople and the owner out in the field, learning, been studying myself, and I'm going to start working with Microwake and become part of the team there. I'm going to speak out. I'm going to be a person that you can turn to and ask questions. But I want to be clear here because they're not paying me to do these videos. They're not paying me to do the supporting documentation because it's a tit for tat situation. I'm learning from them the functional mushroom side. From me, they're learning the psychedelic mushrooms and the compounds. So together, we're going to create these talks. Eventually, the owner is talking with me about us doing some podcasting, which would be a little bit of a different form than this. I'd like to call it the outside of the box, as we talk about the things that he's achieved, the things that I've achieved, the things that we've seen achieved that are outside of the traditional box. This includes cannabis medicines, mushroom medicines, compounded functional mushroom medicines. The goal of the Ask Brynn episodes was to record the knowledge that I knew so I could go back and see it, as well as to be able to share. I kept getting asked the same questions over and over and over again, and they usually had sort of a similar set of themes. Hopefully, by creating these videos and creating the mushroom talks, we'll be able to go back to those same kind of ideas. If you have questions, ask me. If I can bring them up or something that we can address on the series, then we'll do that. If not, I'll refer you back to a video where I believe maybe addresses the questions that you're seeking. We're always looking for collaboration and cooperation. We're always looking to learn more. But again, the Ask Brynn series was originally based on cannabis because that was the industry I was in at the time. Now I'm moving into mushrooms. Now, the mushroom talks will always be a separate part of this, but together in all, it is all the same. I'm going to continue to produce these probably, it used to be once a week. I'll try to do it once every couple of weeks, depending on how things go here. If not, at least once a month. But Microwake itself has 35-ish different products. And I'd like to go through and highlight some of those different products. We'll do certain episodes about them, but I'm going to explain what's going on with these different compounds, why they matter, and a lot of them aren't going to be mushrooms, but why we include them with mushrooms. Not all the talks are going to be about psychedelic mushrooms. This one was. It was to give a little bit of an introduction to people who maybe don't know anything about it, maybe have some interest in it, or to go back into that format of Ask Brynn. If you have any questions, I'll try to put some information in how to get hold of me. Ask Brynn on Facebook is an excellent way to get hold of me as well. Doing this format a little differently, Facebook has changed on me, so I'm doing this as a YouTube-style channel. Bear with me as I stumble through this, but it should be a lot of fun. This has been Ask Brynn, Episode 1, The Mushroom Talks.